There have been 1,472 executions in America since.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Requiem Radio, and I am pleasured to have my guest here with me, Dante and Trad Raider, for our Season 3 finale episode. Been really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a real good show. It's coming out today. So Dante and Trad Raider are two individuals who's been working on a project known as the American Royalists. They're really heavy on pushing forward for tenets such as integralism, royalism, nationalism, and really just a good return to a traditional sense. Really looking forward to diving into this conversation, but before we do, Dante, care to introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, I am Dante. I'm the leader of the American Royalists. I started the organization maybe about 6 months ago, 5-6 months ago, somewhere in October. I'm an American citizen. I think it would be better if we abandoned the democratic republic and we moved over to a monarchy. I think there are a lot of virtues that could be found in a different form of government that would help us to move past the evils of our current age.
Yeah, most definitely. And let's hear it from you, Trad Raider. What do you got for us?
Hey, I'm Trad Raider. If anyone here knows me, they probably know me off Twitter and most of my internet exploits. I also was a founding member of the American Royalists back in October when we originally founded. I'm the political director, so most of my duties within the organization mostly deal with our outreach and then our ideology, so I'm kind of the manager for most of that aspect of our organization.
Yeah, I want to definitely give you guys props because it seems like you're growing pretty well. You got around 300 people on your server, and you have close to 500, 600 on your other Twitter account. So definitely be giving a shout out to that near the end of the podcast. But let's go ahead and start diving into this then. My first question for you would be mainly towards Dante, but what inspired you to start the American Royalist?
Good question. I guess I've always had a fascination with monarchy, and just implicitly I've had a feeling that it was better as a system of governance than a democracy. In the past, republics and democracies have become monarchies in a sense. For example, Rome. I should clarify I'm not one of the individuals who always focuses on Rome, but I guess it's just I want to change this country for what I view as the better.
No, definitely. Sounds awesome. And you thought a good way to do that by creating an organization to share some of your values or to have a reignition of classical political thought?
Right. I guess my belief in monarchism, or as we call it, royalism, it's founded in my religion. I'm a practicing Catholic, as is Trad Raider and most of the highest ranking members in the American Royalists. We do have one Orthodox.
Oh, so you got an infiltrator amongst your ranks. No, I'm kidding. It's good to hear that you guys are going forth with a bunch of traditional conservatism again, and really Catholicism, as I like to say it. But going on to my next question I have for Trad, I'd like to ask, what do you think are some of the core tenets to the American Royalist?
So when it comes to the American Royalists, our platform and kind of our tenets, we have three main principles that drive the rest of our ideas. The first principle is the first principle for every man and should be the first principle for everything we do, and that is God. God is our guiding light. We do everything we do because he tells us to, and we follow his commands faithfully. So he is the basis of everything, and we believe that God's word can be found most truthfully in the Catholic Church. Hence why our organization is implicitly Catholic, though we do allow non-Catholic members to join, such as Protestants and Orthodox, though we do generally limit membership to Christians, and we tend to not allow in other religions or atheists, as they tend to pollute the water of our main idea when it comes to religion, and that being following Christ. Secondly, our second kind of central pillar would be that of king. This is where we get our name, Royalists. We want a royal family in America. We want a king who will rule over us, who will keep us safe, who will effectively rule us while being able to avoid pitfalls that exist within democratic systems or other such systems that we'll get into later, I'm sure. But that's, so king would be number 2. And number 3 is family. Family we put at the very end because family is the basis, the foundation for everything in our society. And we believe that monarchy is the natural extension of the family to a governmental level. The king is but the father of a nation, just as the father is the head of his household. So we base everything around that, and we base what we care about. So we're not, a lot of people think that monarchists are elitists who don't care about people and don't care about families, and we're against that. We care about family, and we care about life, and that's why we are also very vocally, and this of course goes with us being Catholic, but we're also very vocally anti-abortion and anti any policies that would harm the life of any human being unnecessarily. So those are our 3 core principles, and then all of our other principles follow from that.
Definitely sounds really nice. Some really solid stuff there. And a question for both of you. Who were some political or religious figures that established these teachings that you could pay homage to? Because I know we brought up the Catholic Church, but could we get a bit more specific? Was there anyone within the church or any political theorists or theologians or teachers at all that made you go in this direction?
Absolutely, I think there are. And I'll have Dante can give his list too here, but the big ones that I see, firstly and foremost, Jesus Christ. Secondly, I'd say famous kings and emperors, people like Charlemagne, Justinian, Augustus, Constantine, other such rulers who, with strength and fortitude in God, led their nations to greatness and to peace.
My list is very much the same. I would just add in Blessed Carl, but we should emphasize that at the core of this is Jesus Christ, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Fundamentally, if he's going to be the King of Kings, there need to be kings subservient to him. So, that's
indeed,
all.
And within the church, we also have others, as not just Jesus Christ, of course, but we also we follow the teachings of strong churchmen, people like Leo the 13th, Pius the 10th, Pius the 12th, Pope Peter, of course, Gregory the Great, all sorts of great churchmen who show us how we can effectively lead nations and how we can effectively keep peace within our societies.
No, definitely. I'm glad you brought up some of those people. I'd always say for me, it's always been Aquinas and Augustine that's been really helping me with the church. But I always frame it like this. The Holy Catholic Church is not a church of the dead. It's a church for the living. For our God is a God of the living, not a God of the dead. So
Absolutely.
Definitely, that's what I love about Catholicism. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was going to say that I can't believe I forgot Aquinas and Augustine. Augustine is my patron saint, and Aquinas has basically brought a lot of the teachings of people like Aristotle and Plato, which feed into our ideology, and he's modernized them, and he has brought them into the faith so that they are in according with the teachings of Jesus Christ. So those 2 men especially.
Yeah, best said by Aquinas, all truth is God's truth. But yeah, I don't know if you can see him back there, but I have St. Michael the Archangel as my patron saint as well. He's definitely also another shout out I'd like to give. Let's see what else I wanted to ask you guys. So going a bit further, could you discuss the historical examples for a lot of the values and tenets held in the American Royalist?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
So you want to go on this one, Dante?
No, I was actually about to suggest that you take this over.
So yeah, let's take, for example, the father of Europe, one of the greatest kings to have ever lived, Charlemagne, Charles the Great. Charlemagne, he was born into a realm that was fairly consumed by chaos. The kingdoms of the Franks, there were multiple at the time, were consumed in chaos. The royals had become figureheads to most people, and the people really in charge were the masters of the court, people, or the mayors of certain cities, were truly the ones who were in power, and it was Frankish society was really just kind of falling apart at that point. But Charlemagne rose from this and from the help of his father Pepin, and he proceeded to stabilize the entire region of France from Normandy to Occitan, He moved into Germany, into the Saxons, into Bavaria. He pushed tribes that were usually seen fighting Eastern Romans. He pushed them off and obliterated some. He brought peace to his nation. He took the rebellious Saxons who would deny Jesus Christ and would kill Christians, and he brought them to heel. He converted Saxony single-handedly to Christianity, and he protected the Pope from the Lombards who were seeking to destroy Rome. He, at the end of his life, had a peaceful empire where people lived in harmony with each other. There was little crime from what we know, and it was a safe, happy place to be. It had become to the point where the Byzantine Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire as it was known at the time, was less safe than the Frankish lands, when the Romans had always been known for how safe they were and how, they were society. But Charlemagne had come in and taken his society of barbarians, and he'd made them civilized. He'd made them a strong, peaceful nation. And so his is probably the greatest example we could aspire to. But you can look at other great leaders for their inspiration, people such as, for example, Augustus uniting Rome from a republic to an empire, Constantine bringing Christ to the forefront, Theodosius making it the state religion of Rome. You can look at most kings throughout history. We hear a lot of bad kings, and we hear a lot about them, but when you look into it, the reason you don't know about a lot of kings is because a king who rules well is forgotten by history. Because kings who rule poorly are remembered as tyrants, as evil rulers. Kings who win great glory, but violently, people who conquer, are also well known. But the best kings are kings who rule quietly. One of the greatest examples of this is Emperor Antoninus Pius of Rome. Not many people know who Antoninus Pius was. And that's because nothing eventful happened during his reign. He I think he ruled the Roman Empire for like 30, 40 years, when he was expected to rule for 10 at the most. So 30 or 40 years he ruled the Roman Empire, and Rome was at peace. He was preceded by the great Hadrian, who is known for his wall and for his war on Judea and on the Scots. And he's followed by his adoptive son, Marcus Aurelius, who is known as the philosopher king of Rome. But Antoninus Pius himself ruled so effectively that no one remembers him, simply because his realm was at peace. So these are the men, and this is why we follow them.
Yeah, I really like that. And I'd say for me personally, one of my favorites had to be Alexandria. And mainly Thessalphilius and his campaign against actually the Alexandrian temples, where he stomped through and proclaimed to them as like, you have massacred, you have butchered, and you killed our Christians. So it is up to me to return the favor. Woe to your gods, after the death of Seraphith, what temples of any other demons could remain standing? And Socrates at the time wrote about him as being an absolute paradigm to the virtuous and a demon to like the evil or the weak or the wicked. And he was notorious for leveling a bunch of these like pagan temples that were like attacking and martyring Christians. So I thought that was another cool thing of a king, where he kept it balanced out, where it's like, hey, don't mess with these people, won't mess with you. You do mess with these people, there's going to be consequences. That's how this works.
Very nice. Another classic example.
Definitely. Dante, would you like to share anything else on the topic, or are you okay if we move over to the next question?
I'm okay if we move over to the next question. Is my mic better, by the way? Or
Yeah, your mic sounds way better. Yeah. So, something I wanted to ask you guys, I've noticed you have on your servers and on your main accounts and BIOS, you talk about integralism. Could you explain what integralism is to our audience who may not be familiar with it?
Absolutely. Integralism is a very misunderstood idea by a lot of people, and if even known about at all. So I think it's a good thing that we can bring it forward. So integralism, by its very definition, is simply the integration of Catholic moral teaching into the governance of any society. So this is and this is often contrasted or conflated with theocracy. It is not a theocracy. A theocracy, however, is the buzzword used by the left and by liberals who would say that we are theocrats and that we would want a theocracy. But a theocracy is government by priests, right? We do not support a government by priests because we think that priests should be priests, kings should be kings, right? So integralism, what it does is that it removes the sinful and unnatural barrier between church and state without merging the church and state into a single body. It allows Catholic moral teaching to infuse within the laws of a nation, to bring these true morals to a legal precedent and to make them so that the church doesn't have to suggest the morals anymore. They are enforced by law. And this is an idea that is supported by basically every pope to have ever lived, and by many Catholic writers, politicians, theologians. Thomas Aquinas, Augustine, they both supported it. Charles Marat supported it. The Carlists supported it. Integralism is very simply the Catholicization of a nation.
All right, sounds good. Sounds good. And going a bit further on that, could you explain how the principles of subsidiarity and solidarity align with integralism?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things about integralism, and this is something that a lot of people notice about Catholicism that differs it from other people who would want to install quote-unquote Christian nationalism, is that integralism and Catholicism as a whole naturally cares for people and for family more. Not to say that Protestants don't, but there's less of a focus with a lot of people who believe in that, who are Protestant, there's a lot of less belief in helping people directly, a lot less ideas of charity, a lot less ideas of uniting together a nation and working together for a common cause. There's this idea of everyone for themselves, but a nation ideally should just be everyone working together for the same cause. And this especially is helpful in the Catholic Church because once everyone's attention is pointed toward God and toward following Jesus Christ, then we have very little reason to bicker among each other because Christ is the ultimate goal. We may have different paths to him by our, not salvation paths, but we may have different things we do in our earthly life, right? But in the end, Christ is the goal, and getting there should be top priority of everyone in the nation. So integralism, when it integrates Catholic moral teaching into law, sets everyone on that path to Christ. It unifies a nation in following our Lord.
Thank you on that. And I also notice about integralism, if you look about in the history of America, it unfortunately was swept in with the Red Scare of the McCarthy era, where it was seen as a communist, economic or ideals. And I'd like you guys to clarify that a bit more. Could you discuss some of the economic policies that be implemented in society based on integralist principles? And how would these benefit the common good?
Yeah, absolutely. So integralism
Trad Raider.
Yeah, if you want
to. In order to deal with the issue of the Red Scare, before we get into what it is, we should also probably talk about what it isn't. We should clarify for everyone watching, especially if you heard that, integralism and subsidiarity has nothing to do with communism or Marxism, socialism. They come out of a response to them, out of the Vatican decrying. If you'd like to continue, Rob.
No, feel free to continue. I was gonna hear on more about that.
Yeah, well, so yeah, exactly what Dante, and I was going to say something similar. So firstly, yeah, the ideas of integralism and of economic integralism are a reaction against communism and Marxism. This is first seen in the encyclical by Pope Leo XIII, the Rerum Novarum, which at the same time disposes with free market capitalism entirely and with socialism, communism, Marxism, and any form of leftism entirely, because capitalism is bad. It's not as bad as Marxism. We'll get into why Marxism's bad here in a moment. Capitalism simply has no charity. It has no charity for other people. But communism is much worse. It is an atheistic ideology. It is an ideology which dehumanizes people into being simply numbers in the machine for the state, and it has no true care for God. It's actually anti-God in most cases, as we see with the Bolshevik Revolution or in Spain, for example, where communists would dig up the bodies of nuns and do unspeakable things to them. So,
or in communist China, when the party began to bring up supposed counter-revolutionaries so that they may be quote-unquote rehabilitated, or so that they may be mocked by the people. Something
Exactly.
Or even in USSR,
able-
where they had a ban on orthodoxy, and unless you were doing orthodoxy approved by the Russian state, you were dragged from your homes and basically shot for that.
exactly.
communism
It has a very
has-
atheist history.
right, communism has no room for God. Communism is, by nature, like Trad Raider said, anti-God. It is anti-Christ. Communism and socialism, all of that, everything under that umbrella, is materialist. There is no evil. There is no sin. There is nothing that you need a savior from. And there is no God. There is nothing after death that awaits you. So really, all that can fill the place is absolute fealty to the state. And then once the state supposedly disintegrates towards the commune, but as we've seen from history, the state will never go away. The state has given itself omnipotence, and it will never relinquish that. And so in the attempt to put God next to it, it will immediately try to keep him out.
Communism and Marxism of any kind inherently assumes that a utopian society can be created without God, and that is antithetical to everything the church teaches. It also empowers there's a lot of communists who believe that an authoritarian state would take power, and once everyone's fully in the communist mindset, the state would slowly dissolve into communes and people would just be happy dandy, no state, no money, blah blah blah. This is, to anyone who's ever read anything, clearly just wrong. The state will hold on to power, as Dante said, because the state and the people running it particularly start to see themselves as God. When they have no authority that they need to be humbled to, then they have no reason to act within the bounds of any moral code. They can do whatever they want. And you see this with people like Stalin, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot. They killed whoever they wanted. They put down Pol Pot killed people for wearing glasses. People were not safe from these God complex communist leaders who had this complex because they had the absolute power of the state and no one to listen to from above. That's the difference between any godly nation, especially a monarchy, and communists. Every king submits to Christ. Christ is the King of Kings. Communists submit to no man.
And that's definitely a common theme you see under communist societies, where a lot of the state basically says there is no God but me. And it reminds me very well of one of the many teachings and lectures of Bishop Fulton Sheen, where he speaks on communists, where he says all communists know is how to do is tear everything down, down with the state, down with the church, down with authority, down with hierarchy. And he says, well, on the other hand, you have like Catholicism that says up, as like up with the common good, up with man, up with, our advancements, up with our society, up to an appeal to heaven, to God. And that's something I always found to be very touching, showing the differences of them.
Exactly, and that fits exactly into how integralism relates to the other general ideologies of the world. All other ideologies are inherently materialist. They look down to the earth and they say, what can I do with this? What can I do to make myself in a better position with what I have below me? Integralism looks above. We look to God. We look to him for what we can ask of him and what we can do for him while we are here. So integralism inherently is serving God. It is looking up, while all materialist ideologies are just looking down and wanting to bring everything down.
What might I do with the world given to me to please my creator?
Exactly.
No, definitely, and I agree with that. And I was bringing up the McCarthy Red Scare stuff earlier. I know it's disputed whether these actions were good or bad. I lean towards more of the negative for McCarthy, because he did persecute a lot of Catholics and a lot of Catholic organizations who he branded as being communists. As we all know here, we have a very rich history of being rivals and trying to fight back the wave of communism.
Indeed. And you see in another papal encyclical, I believe by Pius XI, though I might be mistaken on that one.
You're correct, it's the 11th.
Quadrigesimo Anno, which is inherently a statement again. It's more modernized to the, I believe it was 30s at the time when it was released, and it is openly against the biggest growing ideologies. And this is why the Vatican was fairly neutral during the Cold War, though they did lean to the U.S. a little bit. It's because they said both communism and capitalism, both the authoritarianism of Russia and the U.S. are harmful. They are not leading toward a godly society. Both are simply looking inwards for what they want from themselves, not from what they can do for God. And so Quadrigesimo Anno, it addresses all of these more modern variations of what was growing in the 1890s with Leo XIII, and it is really a succinct sequel to Rerum Novarum and perfectly encapsulates the Church's moral position on this. And those two documents particularly were the base of modern Catholic moral teaching, which is what we followed dogmatically.
Okay, sounds nice. Going on to the next question I have for you guys lined up. Could you explain what encapsulates monarchism and the specific form the American Royalists would be advocating for?
Yeah, absolutely. So what differentiates monarchism? So a lot of people will look at monarchy and say that's just dictatorship. There's differences. There's small differences and big ones, but the difference inherently between monarchy and any other system, number one, is inheritance. We want a monarch who is the son of the previous. We want a monarch who spent his life learning how to rule. Because governing a society is much like any other trade in that it takes time to learn. And in our modern political system, in the US particularly, our heads of state have 4 years, maybe 8, if they win re-election, to learn how to rule. But they're given full authority the second they're elected. But they still have to learn. This simply doesn't work. If you put inexperienced people in position for short periods of time and expect them to just be able to do it like that, they're going to fail. And that's what democracy does. Look at our current president. You'd think someone who had been in government since before my parents were born would know a thing or two about running a nation, yet he has run us into the ground. So monarchy is inheritance. If you teach your son to rule a nation for you, if you teach him what effective leadership is, if you show him how to submit to Christ and how to serve your people, he will be an infinitely better ruler than any democratically elected individual. Then, addressing the second point, tradition. Monarchy inherently ascribes to tradition, and you'll see this very often with elaborate court rituals and elaborate old titles, and things that just, like for example in England, when the king is seated on the Stone of Scone, I think it's called, most people have no idea what the purpose of this is. But these traditions are what keep a monarchy grounded in the nation. It's what keeps them with the people. It's this tradition. And this is what differentiates it from dictatorships. If we want to address the worst dictator to have probably lived recently, that's not a communist, look to Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was based in no tradition. He was based in no particular care for the past. He only cared about one thing, and that was the idea of the Aryan race succeeding over everything else. He saw no purpose in sticking to tradition. He used to be a communist. His only care was for whatever was best for him and his people, and not for what is best for God and for everyone. He only cared about himself, and this is why he failed. This is why dictatorships fail. Dictatorships are just doing whatever. Kings follow traditions. Kings make sure to establish themselves with their people. Kings succeed. Dictators do not. Monarchy, and there are 3 forms, as you were asking us to describe kind of what we generally lean toward, what kind of monarchy. We are generally against what is known as constitutional monarchy or ceremonial monarchy. This is a monarchy where the king has little to no power. They are essentially a figurehead. This kind of monarchy will not do. We do not argue monarchy for aesthetics. We argue monarchy for effectiveness. So if we were to argue simply for a figurehead monarch, our arguments would be null and void and would make no sense. There are 2 other forms of monarchy which generally our membership team tends to lean between. But these two other forms are called either semi-constitutionalism, which is also just known as a half-and-half monarchy, and then absolutism. A semi-constitutional monarchy is where a king will split power in some percentage, 50-50, 60-40, 75-25, some percentage, with an elected body. Some people see this as a possible way for running a government, though our leadership generally does not, and we do not lean in that direction. We lean toward an absolute monarchy. This is where a king is the authority, where all authority comes from the king, and all the authority of the king comes from God. So this authority that the king has, he then basically issues downward, almost like a waterfall, and from there his authority basically goes to so-and-so, 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 and so-and-so to do what he says, but the ultimate authority is him. No one can overrule him, except for God, of course, but God acts in mysterious ways, as we know. So an absolute monarchy, and a lot of people think when we say absolute monarchy, we mean a highly centralized government. An absolute monarchy doesn't have to be highly centralized. It just has to have one person who is the highest authority. In fact, examples of highly decentralized authoritarian, absolute monarchies, one of the greatest examples of this was the Ancien Régime in France, or the Ancient Regime. This was particularly from Louis XIV to Louis XVI. Louis XIV, he was an absolute monarch. As he said, he was the state. But France was very decentralized. Every different region in France had their own traditions, their own rights. Certain regions were allowed to do certain things, others weren't. And this is because he realized that a nation would work better if local traditions were respected just as national ones were. So generally, the American Royalists does lean toward absolute monarchy.
All right, and a follow-up question to that, either of you guys could take this, but how would that envision a relationship between the monarch and the people in a modern royalist society? And how would you ensure the accountability of representation to avoid, let's say, the Mad King, if you will? Obviously, like we already stated earlier, it's hard and rare to come by, but it's still a possibility. Would you consider to have like a hereditary one almost make a ruler feel power hungry and inclined to that position compared to him like earning it by merit?
So, firstly, to address the first part, the relationship between king and people. Very simply, as I stated earlier, the king is a father to his nation. He is to listen to his people, like a father might listen to his child, and hear their complaints, what they believe needs to be changed, and he'll listen to this. And the primary way he does this is by way of his advisors, though sometimes the king will just listen directly to what the people have to say. And in our modern society, he can read what they're saying. He can go online and see what people are saying. He could read the news. So the king, firstly and foremostly, would simply just hear what his people have to say. But, as a father does, he would likely know what is better for his people, and particularly for his nation, than they would. Right? These people haven't been ruling a nation, and haven't been learning since they were born to rule a nation. So he would still, like a father, he would listen to their complaints, and where applicable, he would help them. But where he knows that what he's doing is in the best interest, even if they don't like it, he has the authority to do as he must. Now, to address, and this is a hard question for some monarchists, but we have it on fair lockdown here. When it comes to bad kings, people always say, well, in a hereditary monarchy, if there's a bad king, there's a bad king. You can't do anything about it because he's hereditary, right? Not true. Most kings go to have 2, 3, 4, 5, however many kids. Usually it's very rare that they have one. If a king, because the king raises all of his children to be rulers, because usually when a king dies, his children get titles, they get their own little areas that they have to rule over under the new king, but they all have to learn to rule in some way. They all have their own fiefs. So, as a king raises his child, he is able to see if the child he has as his primary heir is, a sociopath or someone who can't be trusted in ruling. And the thing is, when push comes to shove, monarchies adapt. Monarchies are able to remove the bad kings. If you look, for example, to Charles, I forget which Charles it was, but of France. This was during the time of Joan of Arc. He went mad, and he was known as the Mad King of France. And he was replaced by his family. his family showed up and they removed him from his kingship and they replaced him. So nobles, and particularly the family of the king, the royals, are smart enough to see when they're, even if it is the king, when their family is incapable of ruling anymore. And I think there's been maybe 2 examples of hundreds, if not thousands, where a king is removed by his family, where it actually goes beyond a simple palace coup d'etat, because most times when a family replaces their family member who's king, no one gets hurt.
I really
By the
like
way,
that.
the king you were looking for was Charles VI.
Thank you, Charles VI.
Yeah, no, you've been on fire so far, like knocking out some really good answers. I appreciate the detail you have in all of your responses.
Thank you.
And a question I want to dive into, and this is one I actually looked forward to talking about because I feel like it's an issue a lot of people aren't aware of, but how would you say the American Royalists contrast with modernist principles that were birthed from the post-Enlightenment? And that's going to be a big question, so I'm okay if you guys take as much time as you need, both of you, to like elaborate what that is.
I was about to say Dante definitely is going to want some airtime on this one, so I'll give him some here in a moment. But firstly, and this is where a lot of people this is where the name calling will often start from the left. They'll often refer to us as fascists because they simply firstly misunderstand what fascism is and misunderstand what royalism is. But the ideas of the Enlightenment and of the French Revolution particularly are these ideas that you can do governance without God. You can go and you can rule without the guidance of the Lord. And you see this in every single modern. If you look to the Jacobins, they were proto-communist. If you look to the French Republic, I mean, they were a pretty standard liberal republic. If you look to the French Empire under Napoleon, even though he was crowned by a pope, he didn't follow God. He followed his own will. And that led to his downfall. Same with his imperial successor, Napoleon III, some 100 years later. Or a little under, actually. I think it was more like 80, but he failed too. Because when you attempt to take God out of the governing equation, it doesn't work. You can look at any system of governance, libertarianism, communism, liberalism, Nazism, fascism, anything. All of them lack inherently tradition and God, and this is what leads them to fail every time. Some fail faster than others. There are ideologies that tend to be more extreme, things like authoritarian communism or fascism. These are much like flash bulbs. They burn out very quickly. They just go pshh, and in a fiery explosion, they break a bunch of crap. This is not good, evidently. But other systems, like especially the ones that are considered more moderate today, like liberalism, neoliberalism, republicanism, these ideas of democracy, they die slower. They're more like an old light bulb. They'll burn for a while, but very slowly they start to dim, and they dim, and they dim, and eventually your lights go out and you weren't prepared for it. So these ideas inherently fail simply off the basis of the fact that they lack God, but they also they reach into so many areas of sin that it destroys any form of governance that could work. Communism is too much into actually, I'd start with the most apparent one, fascism. Fascism is an ideology steeped in hatred. For fascism to work, there must be, but there must be an outgroup. There must be a people you hate. That is inherently opposed to God. God loves everyone, even the greatest sinner. Communism is an ideology of greed. I want it. I want it. I want it. I want money. I want food. I want land. I want power. Modern republics are this putting yourself before God. They are the pride of governance systems. They're this idea that I know what's best for me. The will of the people is better than God. Who is God to tell us what we can do? This is the idea of democracy, and this is why it's incompatible. Because the thing that you see in the French Revolution that led to all of this was the French revolutionaries did not simply attack the monarchy. They knew the monarchy would never die if the church didn't die with it, so they attempted to kill the church. They killed churchmen, they killed deacons, they killed faithful Catholics in the Vendée, the people of the Vendée knew the exact same. They knew that if the church died, the monarchy would die, and if the monarchy died, the church was next. So they fought not only for the king, and not only for Christ, but for both. They bore the banner of the Sacred Heart as they marched against the revolutionaries. This is simply the most important part of why every revolutionary or post-Enlightenment ideal fails, because it attacks God, it attacks the church, and it attacks any form of morality which would follow from that. Dante?
I guess I will go into a different direction on the topic of modernism. Modernism, like you've mentioned, is inherently destructive. All that it does is it withers the connection between God and man. And while you went into politics, I'll go more into the religious side of this. The whole idea of we, the people, we can know better than God, that comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of who and what God is. God is, as all three of us would agree, the source and the summit of all being. He not merely does he exist as everything else does, he subsists. It is his very essence that makes the ground for all things to come into being. Therefore, all morality, all authority, it stems inherently from God. When you begin to question why does God have the authority, when you begin to think that God is just some other being, some other super being, that's where that fundamental mischaracterization of God as being like a Marvel superhero comes from. Like, oh, why is it that you don't believe in like these pagan gods? It misunderstands the character of God. He's not just some greater existence. He's the greatest existence that can be. He's all that he can be. So as we begin to sort of remove him from the equation, you go down into deism and then into agnosticism. Well, once God no longer serves as the ultimate moral authority, does there even need to be a God? Then you get into atheism. There is no God. I make my own authority. And then at the very end of this wicked road, you find anti-theism, something that has been there implicitly from the beginning. I despise God. I despise everyone who follows his authority. And so those who attempt to keep the authority of God, you will seek to eradicate them. They're a threat to progress. And every image of God that can be seen, it must be wiped away. It's a fundamental issue with abortion. It no longer recognizes the value of the human person, and so they're just things that we can dispose of. Everything can be disposed of. There's no value to anything. If there's no God, fundamentally there can be no value. What are you supposed to draw value from if there's no objective existence?
That's something I always point out when talking, especially if like people who are atheists and like liberal, when they would go on and screech that there's no scientific evidence for God, and then immediately turn around and say human rights exist. And I kind of scratch my head and say, where's the scientific evidence for human rights again? That concept, that non-tangible thing
and this
that
comes
we
from,
all subscribe to.
Well, and there's a very particular philosopher who I'd like to hate on for a moment, who brought about this idea.
Oh boy.
Immanuel Kant. I despise Immanuel Kant. He and many of his followers and people who were inspired by him, including John Locke, believed that there was this idea that society only exists once we form a social contract. There's this idea that humans inherently, from their existence, are naturally greedy and just want to do whatever they want for themselves. And the only way that a society starts to exist is when we start to agree with each other that we are going to not hurt each other and we're going to help each other. This is the idea of the Enlightenment. It builds this idea that any greater society, any greater function of governance is formed from people. The authority comes, and this is a Locke idea, and one that I particularly do not like, that being that it is by the will of the people, by the consent of the people to be governed, that the government is able to rule. That's not true. Anyone with enough guns and people willing to hold them can rule, with zero consent from the people to rule. Once again, dictators. The idea that social contract exists in any way This idea that there are inane rights that people have just from the ether is inane. And it, again, like democracy, it looks at this idea that it thinks that people are the authority. It's from their consent that they're allowed to be governed, so they're the power. No. Authority, power, and right to rule come from God. They come down from him, not from a collective of the people. It's not like we build some sort of great energy of governance in society by a mere mass of people. That's not how it works. That's not how it's ever worked. Simply put, Kant has ruined governmental philosophy since he started speaking. And so for that reason, I despise him. I despise I despise Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I despise Hegel, Nietzsche, the Marquis de Sade, all of these people. All of them were fools who knew nothing of God's true light.
I would like to go back to something previous that you mentioned, Sola.
Yeah,
Where's the scientific evidence for God? Where's the scientific evidence for God? Oh, but human rights is
really quick.
Something to just. Oh, continue.
No, I was gonna say, if for anyone who's interested who wants a little cheat code, I like to share this because it's a little gem I have. I would encourage you to look up Feyerabend's book. It's called Against Method, and the whole point of the book was he written this as both a mathematician and philosophy professor in the 1970s, and at the time he saw a very sharp rise in funding with the STEM fields and neglect of the humanities. And basically you had the STEM fields being like trying to propose this idea of, oh, we don't need God, all we need is the science will lead us forward. And what Feyerabend wrote in this book was basically him having gloves off, being like, you guys want to throw down, we could throw down, let's see how good your science holds up. And proceeds to go through historical examples of like where the quote-unquote scientific method failed, what are its limitations, why it can't be applied as a categorical error for, like, you know, saying, well, where's the science of God? He goes very hard on all that stuff like that, where he just like slams them. And it's funny because he even predicted in his book saying, if the funding continues and there is not going to be a stop, he promised there's going to be a new wave of atheism led directly by STEM fields who think they could play God. And that's exactly what we saw in the 2000s, early 2000s, mid 2000s. With the whole New Age. So I'd 100% encourage anyone to read that book. It's about 200 pages long. It's very easy to pick up and read book. It's very amazing.
So, where's all the scientific evidence for God? How can you believers rationally hold to the existence of your sky fairy? Where can you get that from? I'm sorry. What part about science allows you to examine empirically what exists beyond dimensionality? Well, what allows you to examine something that does not exist in the world? What allows you, so a worldly being, to mathematically categorize the ultimate existence, the thing that created the world? How presumptuous of you to think that you have the right to think that you have the ability to. This is not some fossil. This is not some dinosaur. This is God. Now, this might seem contrary to that point, but I would say we have found scientific evidence for God. We haven't scientifically shown God in the way that most people would think of him, but tell me, Philip, how much do you know about Eucharistic miracles?
Not enough as I should. Do you want to elaborate more?
I will elaborate a tiny bit. I don't want to completely derail the topic.
Yeah,
but
feel free to. It's your guys' episode.
In Buenos Aires, from 1992 to 1996, and I should clarify, this is not the only time that these occurred. They have occurred all across the world at different times for centuries. But this is one of the most recent ones that I have personal knowledge of. There were 3 separate occurrences where a host, a consecrated host, what we believe in Catholic theology, for those who might not know, and for those who need a bit of a reminder, is the transubstantiated body and blood of Jesus Christ. It is his body, blood, soul, and divinity, but it retains the appearance of bread and wine. With these miracles, they did not retain the appearance of bread and wine. They became visibly flesh and blood. And these pieces of flesh and blood, they bled AB blood. They constantly produced, over the span of multiple years, in a environment of distilled water, and that's important, just constant white blood cells that would not decay. What's important, white blood cells, if I remember correctly, usually decay anywhere between 15 minutes and a few hours. They did not decay for multiple years. Distilled water, additionally, is not a good environment to keep flesh in or to keep blood in. It dissolves. Nextly, the flesh that was observed in these transformed hosts was cardiac tissue. I believe it was from the left ventricle. It was where blood goes into the heart and then is reoxygenated, and it was damaged. It was as though someone had put this person through immense torture. Now, those who are Catholic, you might recognize that in Christ's Passion, he was beaten brutally, he was scourged, and he was crucified. Crucifixion is the single most awful way to go. You're suffocated for hours, if not days on end, in a hot sun. Every time that you try and breathe, gravity almost pulls down on you. I should clarify, you can also find images of these miracles online. I don't know what you do in the editing process, Sola, but if you want to flash some images of these things online, you probably should, in case anyone is interested.
Stuff in for our channel on YouTube, because on YouTube we do have actual visual, like editing stuff. But
nice.
On all of our platforms, the audio.
And another thing to mention about these Eucharistic miracles is that they often can be predictory of certain things happening. For example, the last Eucharistic miracle I believe that has happened in 2012 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. In Buenos Aires, Argentina, a Eucharistic host in a small chapel, I forget where, was found on the floor. And so this Eucharistic host was picked up and disposed of in the normal way, which is to put it in water and let it dissolve.
I think you might actually be combining two together. I believe that's actually the story of the 1996.
Well, okay.
If I remember correctly, there was a Eucharistic miracle that did occur in 2012.
Yes.
I believe it actually wasn't Brazil.
No, it was in Buenos Aires. Hold on. I remember it was in Buenos Aires, and here's why. Because the Bishop of Buenos Aires at the time, the one who had to actually investigate this Eucharistic miracle and bring it to the Vatican, this bishop was named Bishop Bergoglio, or Jorge Bergoglio, now known today as Pope Francis, a year before his election by the Papal Conclave. So, these miracles can often produce things, and sorry, I had to go for a moment. Did you mention the blood types?
Yes, AB blood.
And you mentioned how this matched the Shroud of Turin.
I did not mention that, but
we've had a guest on earlier, shout out to Luca, who actually wrote a paper and then got it published on the Shroud of Turin, so it was fun interviewing him and discussing that.
Yes,
it's nice. Could you actually send that to me? I'd love to read that.
I'll love to send it to you.
I don't know if he mentioned this. I haven't seen the episode. I'd love to watch it once this is done. But some important new things that were found about it. I assume that he covered the Wax S tests that were performed in 2019 up to 2020. Yes. Okay, yeah. So something interesting. The blood samples in the shroud contained bilirubin, which is a chemical compound that is found in individuals who either have jaundice or who have been brutally tortured to near death, if not to death. That's just something that I always found very interesting. Additionally, the right shoulder, I believe, was dislocated in such a way that you could almost tell something had fallen on the shoulder to sort of dislodge it up.
Indeed. There was also one of the most crazy parts is the unexplainable ways that Christ's figure was marked into the shroud. A lot of people thought it was paint, or burns, or just dirt. But they actually
Not ochre.
attempted to remove the pigmented fragments. They were unable to, because the only way that that it could have been made that color was if at that very moment there was a collision of neutrons, which would have caused a neuron blast, basically powerful enough to level a city. That's not exactly something that was reported as happening in first century Judea. So it must have been something a bit more supernatural to have caused that. Like, I don't know, the soul of
how
God
the leading
himself.
atheist scientists, their theory to that is saying that he was just in a cave, bro, with like a lot of mushrooms that somehow emitted radiation. That's why. And then it's like,
Oh,
well,
yes.
and then it was like, well,
Yes,
that's the best theory we got. And I'm like, okay.
Yes, the cave mushrooms produced enough energy
Yeah.
to essentially blow up an entire city. I'd love to see the justification for that. I want to see it.
Yeah, it's simply just goes to show how unbelievable a lot of atheistic arguments are, and they just do not follow. I mean, funnily enough, science. What happened? And this is one thing I was going to mention. I don't think Dante talked about this. Science should not be seen as an opposition to God, and God should not be seen as opposition to science. Seeing this puts us in a bad camp for both. If you see science as truth and God as the opposite, you are denying yourself God. If you see God as the truth and science as the opposite, you're denying yourself a way of understanding God's creation. Science is a method developed by the church, which is meant for us to help ourselves understand the world around us and understand what God has created for us. It is not us determining what is true. It is us finding out more. And this is why theology, the study of God, is called the mother of all sciences. It is, when you study God, you study his creation, right? When you study theology, you get into ontology, you get into philosophy, you get into mathematics, you get into biology, and then you get into chemistry, you start getting into main sciences. Yep. These sciences, keep in mind, universities were originally made as places for Catholic theologians and philosophers to discuss with each other things that they had discovered or things that they were thinking about, and the way that they paid for basically just being there and not actually doing what was considered a real job at the time. The way they did that was by offering out their services to teach people who wanted to be like them, right? If you paid them money, they would teach you, and then you yourself would become educated, and they would have a way to continue living while focusing their efforts not on menial labor, but on actually learning. And this is what universities still do to this day. We must remember that hospitals, universities, places of education, health, charity, all founded by the Catholic Church. Study of science, genetics, of anything. The Big Bang, Mendel and his genetics, his peas. Every bit of science is influenced in some way by the Church. The Church has always been there from the beginning and will continue to be there to the end of scientific study. Because study of anything in this world is inherently a study of God.
And what I love about that too, really quick, if you guys could see, let me try to focus this a bit more. But you have a wheel here, and this is the best analogy I give to people. So in this wheel, you have at the center, which is known as a hub. That, to me, when we're discussing what is evidence or what is, the study of things, I give this analogy. So the hub is seen as what is the logos, like what is the truth, what is the wisdom. Truth and wisdom can be found in many different fields of study, such as archaeology, such as history, such as literature. It is not exclusive to like only this scientism today, where it's like only the science is the evidence. And I would say what separates every single wheel, or every single portion of this field, are the spokes. So the wooden little sticks that are connected from the outer part of the wheel to the hub that go around it. And overall, that is the universal concept of what I see to be as knowledge. And outside of the wheel are things that we could never possibly fathom or know. Like we cannot ever fully know, or 100% understand or comprehend the natures of God in a sense. Or like what is fully God for this. because God is, an all-powerful, all-omnipotent being beyond human capacity to some things. We could reason to the extent of God, but we can never 100% know God down to a T, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
I guess I would like to add something.
Sure.
If you think that science and religion are contradictory or that they're opposed, you have bought into, and I'm being completely serious when I said this, you have bought into Protestant propaganda. This is called the conflict thesis. If I remember correctly, the history of this was that it was created by Protestants in, I believe, either the 17th or the 18th centuries. And they were like, oh, the Catholic Church, it burned the scientists. It's against science. The Catholic Church, it believes the world is flat. And then as humanism arose and the atheism arose, they then turned that on its creators, and they just extended that to all of Christianity and then all of religion. If you have bought into the idea that you can have only either science or God, you are an idiot who has bought into propaganda.
It's very much like seeing the world as, oh guys, don't you know, chemistry and physics are completely contradictory ideas. Chemistry sees the world in formulas of chemicals, and physics sees atoms and electrons. If you think those two are compatible in any way, you're dumb. Like that's trying to contrast God and science.
And it's like, it's just wrong. I don't know how to express it in any other way than it's just a stupid idea. In order for both to make sense in context, you need to have both.
Because with chemistry and physics, once you get to like base level chemistry and base level physics, they're the same science. You're learning about elements, you're learning about valence electrons, you're learning about reactions. Physics and chemistry on the base level are the exact same science. Same with any sciences, because they all stem from the same thing. When you simplify, take mathematics for example. Mathematics developed simply as a study of philosophy. Philosophy and mathematics are joined at a point on the study of anything. All of it comes down to God. God is the origin. He is the most simple science. He is the most, and at the same time, complicated science. He is the origin of science. He is science. Everything that science can prove proves God.
Hey guys, really quick,
God is science.
Really quick, we're going to be going over to our break. We're a little bit over time. We'll be right back shortly. All right, we're back from our break now. And a question I wanted to bring us back on course, and this one could be to either of you guys, but I noticed the American Royalists also has the terms nationalism or nationalist in some of their bios. And that's something that kind of caught me off guard. And I was curious how you would contrast concepts of monarchism and royalism with nationalism. And what I mean by that is that nationalism is, a term that was invented in the post-Enlightenment that was seen as like a subsidiary replacement for monarchism. So would you guys see that be contradictory at all, or how would you respond to that?
Generally, no. And here's why. Thinking of nationalism as a replacement for monarchy is a poor idea. Nationalism at its base is simply a strong desire for one's nation to do well. That is evident in monarchism. It's something very commonly shared among all forms of monarchy, is the will of the nation to do well, right? There's this idea of, if you look even to pagan Rome, back before Christianity was even there, there's this idea of Roma Impera, right? Rome Empire, or Roma Invicta, the unconquerable Rome, right? It's about Rome. It was about the nation, and though nation was different then than what it is now, that idea has always existed. The only difference is that it was just kind of evident to monarchism. But once monarchism was destroyed and taken down by a good deal of Europe, the European right wing needed something to look to, something that would be traditional, but wouldn't be monarchy, because monarchy, at least to them, was a long foregone conclusion. It was never happening again to them. So they started with nationalism. They said, well, the nation, that's what we need to lock into. We need to lock into the nation. Monarchists, simply, we see the king as the state and the state as the king. The only difference really being between them and us was they saw it more as kind of a malleable thing, not as being particularly tied to the monarchy. A lot of people see nations in the idea that there is a general nation and then there is a government attached to that nation. Monarchists see a nation that lives and dies with its king. So truly, and in the American sense, we care about America and Americans. We want to do what is best for America. We care about our nation. That's simply put what we are.
Would you see it then as just being a pivot point towards monarchy, or would you say it as just still being in the backdrop of it? Because I'm still hung up on like, what is the need of nationalism when we have, monarchy? Like, what is the need of that? And I'm sorry for giving you a bit of pushback here, but to me, it's like a watered down version of monarchy. Like, that's one of my, if you ever hear me, my critiques towards like Christian nationalism, where I say it doesn't go far enough. It's still holding on to post-Enlightenment liberal ideals that was birthed from the French Revolution.
Yeah, absolutely. But nationalism should be seen as an aid, not an enemy. You should see nationalism as basically you support your family, you support your locality, your community, you support your nation, you support your king. They're all different steps of the same thing, right? Is supporting your locality or community being in opposition to your king? No, it's simply just another stepping stone. And it's one that must exist in this modern era where borders are highly defined to millimeters. We must have this idea of nationhood, because without it, we're not people who are stuck in one village for our entire lives. Nation is now more important than it ever was during the medieval era. There are things from, medieval kings that we kind of have to abandon now, because in our modern world, they're impossible. Things like this idea of just generally existing within the area of a king, right? You have to exist within his nation now. It simply is a modern tweak, but it retains the tradition and the monarchist ideals.
Okay, sounds good. And Dante, were you going to comment on that as well?
Personally, I would view nationalism as like a pivot to monarchism. I'm fine with the usage of it, but I feel like it could just be a stepping stone towards what we need. Additionally, I'm not sure if you would call it nationalism, but I very much think that people should be proud of where they are from, and they should take pride in where they're born, in their nation. Even if I don't support the American government, even if I absolutely despise it in its current form, I still love America. I want America to succeed.
Yes, we are I just want
it to be better.
Yes, we're not just royalists. We are American royalists.
Definitely, I agree with that. And that definitely clarifies a lot of things as well. And something I'd like to ask going in more is, what are some of your thoughts on the balance between national sovereignty and international cooperation? So how are we going to be relating to other nations or other people, if you will?
Well, simply enough, one of the easiest ways to determine this is, do you need to? One of the biggest issues with the U.S. is that it plays world police force, and that gets us into a lot of issues. So we have to look, what would we support and what wouldn't we support? Well, we don't support Israel. We're funneling money into a stupid proxy war in the Middle East that has no purpose. It supports nothing but the existence of Israel itself, which we don't particularly care for because we're not Israeli. Same with Palestine, same with Ukraine, same with Russia. We're not Russians, we're not Ukrainians, we're not Palestinians, we're not Israelis. We shouldn't care, particularly unless it affects us in a direct way, what happens there. Now, there is, however, a difference. There is a time when I think intervention is justified, and that is when crimes are being committed against Christ's people for being Christ's people. So one of the greatest examples, Armenia, is currently under attack by Azerbaijan. The Muslims of Azerbaijan are putting Christians to siege in Artsakh, and the Turkish, along with the Azerbaijanis, are threatening to destroy Armenia, the oldest Christian nation on the planet. They're threatening to end it. And this is a time when intervention would be completely justifiable, because we're going in to help Christ's people. We belong, just as I said, you would fight to help your locality, you would help to fight for your locality, for your nation, for your king. Well, we have to fight for the King of Kings and his people too.
All right. I like that a lot. And overall border policy, how would you guys address that?
So, I mean, we generally hold nationalist views on it. We think that there are good immigrants. Obviously, there are people who can come here and improve us and improve themselves. But generally, we think that America should be for Americans, and we would support protecting our border from mass waves of immigration, because whenever you have mass waves of immigration in any nation, it threatens to destroy it.
All right,
Now,
sounds good.
yeah.
And one more question I wanted to ask you that I apologize, I should have brought it up earlier. I know we touched on some things where there's common misconceptions for you guys, but what do you believe are some other main common misconceptions for the American Royalists? Because I've already heard you said like people think you're fascist, which that's clearly not true. Is there any other ones that come to mind?
We get fascist a lot. We get Nazi. We get Republican for some reason. Like, oh, you're just a Trump supporter. No, not really. We rarely get called anything like leftist. We never get called Marxist because we're so vehemently opposed to it. But there's just this idea that we must be some form of pseudo-fascist ideology because we support tradition and a strong government, but that's simply not the case. As for general misconceptions about the American Royalists, number one, the biggest misconception that people have about us whenever they come to us is they believe that we want to be kings. Like, they think that I want to go out and march up to Washington and say, I, Trad Raider, am king of America. There's not a single person in our entire organization who thinks they're fit to be the king of America. Not
I like
one.
that. Humility, definitely.
Yeah, our whole point is that we want to be subservient to a king. We don't want to be the kings. That's number one.
Being a king is not a dream job that you should lust after. Being a king is a position that you should only have begrudgingly because it is by nature going to be full of hardship.
Exactly.
The reason we are so willing to submit to a king is because a king by nature must be, and pardon my French, so willing to tolerate everyone's bullshit that he just naturally overcomes himself, if you understand my meaning.
Indeed. And there's just this idea that monarchists are only in it because they think they're going to be the one in charge, right? And that's what a lot of ideologies actually do, right? They're just like, well, I'd do better if I was in charge. I don't think I would. I think I'd do better if someone else was in charge, someone who was trained to do it from birth. So that's big misconception number one. Big misconception
The whole reason we're so against democracy is because everyone trying to have a say in a government leads to nowhere, and especially with the faux democracy of America, or at least that everyone thinks is a democracy, it's not. You have no power anyways. Anything that you think you can do, it's an illusion. It doesn't exist. You have never once contributed anything. Sorry to break the veil, to pull it back for a moment, but you have not done anything for the leadership of this country. It will continue to move along without you. It doesn't care about your opinions. In fact, it's going to try and influence your opinions to do what it wants.
Indeed. Another big misconception when it comes to monarchists as a whole, but the American Royalists get a lot of it too, is the idea that we're elitists. We only think that our class of people should be the ones who get anything good happening to them. We don't agree with that. We are for everyone. We want everyone to be happy. And here's where the distinct distinction, if you will, is I think everyone should live a prosperous, happy life where they are able to serve Christ and serve their families. I think everyone should have that. Everyone should have a good life. Not everyone should have a say in governance. Because here's a fun fact. The way bell curves work, there is an average, and then that's the very highest number is going to be your average, right? That's standard bell curve. Think of the most average person you know, the most average guy intelligence-wise, just plain intelligence. Half of the country is going to be stupider than that guy. Half. And that's enough to turn a presidential election. So that's why inherently we will not support democracy. Now, I'm not saying that because they're stupid they don't deserve rights, but I don't think that they deserve the right to rule the government. That doesn't make sense. There are too many people who will just go to the ballot box and select the color that their state is. Oh, I'm going to vote red because my family's red, or I'm going to vote blue because my family's blue. And they don't look into anything regarding policy, foreign, domestic, anything. They don't read into any of it. They just vote for whoever they're told to vote for because they don't think. Most people do not think when it comes to governance. That's why we do not support democracy.
Additionally, if they do think, it's always in the realm of moral or political compromises. Oh, well, we can't get people on our side with this issue, so, we just need to tone this down. We can't talk about this. Which, sure, that's fine and dandy and all. Until you get to topics like abortion, on whether or not a fetus is a human life, and whether or not we can just strip that away and tear them apart with tongs for the convenience of those who want to have free sex. We won't be able to get people on our side with this. So you're going to let the worth of a human life be decided by idiots?
Yes, and this is the other thing. And this is why we don't just say democracy is a dumb system of governments. We think it's an evil one, and here's why. If it were just that everyone voted equally with no outside, everyone, no matter how dumb or smart, just voted, right? Straight for whatever they thought. Democracy might be a less bad system. It might actually be good. But here's the thing. In most societies, the ignorant will be led by the stupid. Or sorry, not by the stupid. The ignorant will be led by the malicious, right? People who are particularly evil will be able to persuade large groups of people to their point, especially when morals, good morals, like Catholic ones, do not give you a lot of things that your body naturally wants, right? If you look at a lot of Catholic teachings, a lot of people think Catholic teachings are just, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. In some ways it is, because to accept God is to deny yourself. And a lot of people don't want to do that. A lot of people don't want to deny themselves because, who wants to inherently deny themselves? It's, I want what I want. Why can't I have it? Is what most people believe. But when you have morals that are actually going to lead us to salvation and lead us to a better life, they are hard and they're not easy decisions to make. So when you have someone who is acting malicious and against God, they can very quickly say to a very large group of stupid people, they can say, hey, I'll give you free stuff. Just come do whatever I say. I will give you free things. I will make you happy. I will let you do whatever you want. Sexual revolution, blah, 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 all that. That is what happens when actively malicious people lead stupid people. And that is what happens in democracies. And that's why it's...
I could swear that is the entire reason that Athenian democracy fell.
Exactly.
Guys, I'm going to give you cool stuff. It's going to be so great. I just need you to put my name on the ballot, and you're going to get everything you've ever wanted. Not to say that I am evil, but if I was going to give into the deepest, darkest parts of my humanity, and if you gave me $10 million, maybe even $1 million, preferably $100 million, I swear to you that within at most 10 years' time, I could convince a sizable portion of this country that I am a demigod. People are moldable and stupid. And we cannot have these kinds of people deciding who is going to lead us. That's how we got Joe Biden.
If you may, we're getting a bit close to the end of the episode, so I want to get through some questions before we close up. Would that be okay with both of you?
Mm-hmm.
Sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
Try to speed through some of these. So, a question I have for you guys, we already talked about more modernism, but in today's moral climate, many individuals embrace a live and let live consent-based morality system. What are your thoughts on this, and do you see a better moral system that could be in place?
Absolutely. Live and
let live is asking to die.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, it doesn't have anything to do with me. I guess I should just let it happen.
Yeah, simply
until it begins to knock at your front door and it overpowers you. Because you didn't act fast enough.
Libertarians will often say, oh, live and let live, just let people do whatever they want. Yeah, communists will always exist in some capacity, or people like them, and they're going to, if you're not going to do anything to stop them, they're going to stop you. So might as well actively promote good morals instead of just hoping people passively accept them.
When good men do nothing, evil flourishes.
Exactly.
And obviously, this message won't resonate with any viewers who don't believe in an objective morality or who don't believe in a God. But to those of you, my fellow Catholics, my fellow Christians, my fellow theists in general, if I wish to go so far, you cannot sit idly by as people seek to destroy all that is sacred and all that is holy in the name of just let the people do what they want, man. Why does it affect you? Because nothing doesn't affect you. Well, I should say, nothing doesn't not affect you. Everything has a butterfly effect. Everything will snowball until it becomes unstoppable.
Indeed.
And you have the moral responsibility and the power to stop it before it gets to that point.
Indeed.
All right, sounds good. And another question I have for you guys. So we got 2 more before we wrap up.
Awesome.
Actually, 3, my apologies. So my next question would be, what current obstacles do you see your organization facing now and in the near future that you wish to overcome? So or anything you guys think you want to address, like, hey, we need to work more on this, we're going to like do this more?
Yeah, predominantly, and this is one I've struggled with a bit, getting too eager. We're not as big as we want to be right now, and we don't have the numbers to back up some of the things that we've tried to do. I mean, getting on your show is a great thing for us, and it'll definitely help with our membership, but really we just kind of have to sit here, and this is the hardest part of doing anything in politics. We kind of just have to wait until we have numbers. And we can go out and promote to an extent, but if we go too quickly, things are going to overwhelm us, and we're not going to be able to do the things we want to do effectively. We're going to get kind of overrun with people, and we don't want to do that. So we kind of have to let ourselves simmer for a bit. Let our, to use cooking as an analogy further, we have to let the flavors come out very slowly, and we can't just burst it all into a blame of fireball.
We need to maintain a stable rate of growth. Too fast, we'll consume ourselves. Too slow, it'll burn out.
And we're trying not to get whacked by the feds.
Nice.
Yeah,
And
it's always a good one.
another question I wanted to ask on this too. We've been talking a lot. You said your organization is predominantly Christian. Would you guys be open to any members outside of the faith who, let's say, share a common goal or interest? So I know this is going to get on dicey territory, but like, let's say, even like a Muslim who's like very pro traditional values and stuff like that. Would you consider that to be someone who could be able to join?
Somewhat. The main issue is that we generally are going to move in a very quick direction of Catholic teaching, or at least apostolic Christian teaching, and Muslims very quickly become opposed to that and to our ideology. But we're happy to work with people who are willing to work in a more traditional direction. It just, when we get to the point where we are starting to implement things, like especially if this government ever happens that we hope for, once we start integrating the faith into our laws, that's when we're going to see a lot of pushback. So we're not going to. So we would allow people to join, and we allow people to join our server who aren't Christian, and we talk to them and we learn them a thing or two about our ideology. But actual membership, I think not generally, but we would work with them.
All right, sounds good. And final question for you guys: do you have any closing remarks for the audience listening in? And where can they find your organization or works at? So what socials do you guys have? Where can people find you?
So,
Trad Raider?
Yeah, I'll go on this and then I'll let Dante give his. Firstly, Sola, thank you for having us on. It's been a great time. Great hanging out with you, talking about all this stuff. I love getting into these discussions, and it keeps the mind sharp. So this is something I'd love to do again if you have more things you'd like to talk about with us in the future. Honestly, people, look at your government today, see how it's functioning or not in that matter, and realize that there is a better system, a more godly system, a system that will care for you and for the many. If you would like to find our socials, we can be found on Twitter at TA Royalists. You can find my Twitter at Thomas Dominus2.
Do not mention my Twitter.
I'm not going to mention his because he doesn't want his mentioned, but Thomas Dominus2, Dominus. And you can join our Discord server. That's going to be on our Twitter. Or you can search us on Discord, where we have our Discord linked, and come chat with us. You're probably going to get let in by myself, Dante, some other member of our leadership mod team, meet all the great people on our server, just hang out, have a good time. We're not always serious. We like to have a good time with our members. So just come check us out. We'd love to have you, and we'd love to teach you more about our ideology.
All right, that sounds good. And yeah, go ahead.
It's been great to be on here. It's been a great night. I've had a lot of fun doing this. This is probably my first time getting on one of these podcasts, getting to talk about the movement. Like Trad said, come on down. We're willing to talk with you, whether you're a detractor or whether you'd be willing to support us. We will always entertain a conversation. Just make sure to not be too unserious. We are trying to be a serious organization here.
Of course.
All right, sounds
Other than
good.
that,
Anything else?
no.
All right. You've heard it here, folks. We had Dante and Trad Raider with us talking about the American Royalists. This is a really good finale episode. I enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all for Season 4. Quick note, we will be going on a brief hiatus to expand our brand more and open up a website and merchandise. So make sure you check that out in the near future. Hope you all have a rest of your good day and be safe, everyone.